Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 37 of Blackhawks Banter, brought to you by the Hockey Writers. Thank you for joining us today as you watch from your favorite social media platform, be it YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or perhaps you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. However you join us, be sure to subscribe, like, follow, and tell all your friends to join us as well. Tonight, we are joined by Boysen Shaun Filippelli, and I am Gail Kauchak. Unfortunately, Brooke Laferno is a healthy scratch tonight. She had something come up, but I'm sure she will be around to join us next week. But we are all ready to go here. Shaun's got his awesome, great big Blackhawks hat on. So let's get into things and talk Blackhawks. I would like to jump into our first topic. As an overview for our show, I want to go ahead and we're going to rehash some Duncan Keith trade details, address another huge trade rumor. Before we get into our meaty topic, we're going to talk a lot about the Seattle Kraken Expansion Draft today to round out our show. So our first topic, we are all still reeling a little bit from the Duncan Keith trade. And in the aftermath of this trade, TSN's hockey insider Pierre LeBrun provided some more details for the trade. As we know, Keith and forward prospect Tim Soderlund went to the Edmonton Oilers, and Caleb Jones and a 2022 third-round draft pick was the return for the Blackhawks. But apparently this third pick will become a second-round pick if the Oilers win 3 rounds in the 2022 playoffs and if Keith is among the top 4 defensemen in TOI time on ice in those first 3 rounds. So apparently Stan Bowman is kind of using Keith's extensive playoff experience and workhorse reputation as selling points to the Oilers general manager Ken Holland. So I've got a two-point question here for us. A, do you think that the Oilers will make it 3 rounds? And B, do you think that Keith really will be in the top 4 in time on the ice during those 3 playoff rounds or however long they're in the playoffs? And let's go ahead and start with Greg.
This is going to be a 3rd-round pick. There's no way that's going to be a 2nd-round pick. I'll do the second part first. Do I think Keith will be top 4 in time on ice? If he's healthy, yes, he will. That's easy. The Oilers are going to win 3 rounds. On what freaking planet is that going to happen on? Not this one, not with this current roster, unless they go crazy and Ken Holland all of a sudden figures out how to be a good GM again. The team ain't going any. They're not winning 3 rounds in the Western Conference. It's essentially the same group of guys that lost to the Blackhawks and then didn't win a single game against the Winnipeg Jets. Now they're going to win 3 rounds in a row just because Duncan Keith is there? Come on. Whatever they're smoking, pass some this way. I want some. That's some good stuff right there. Ain't happening. No way. No way. And that's not a rip on Duncan Keith. I love Duncan Keith, but he's not even 2013 Duncan Keith, 2014 Norris Trophy winning Duncan Keith isn't taking that team to the Stanley Cup final. Just not happening. Not with that current roster.
All right. Okay. But you do believe that he'll be top 4 in time on ice?
If he's healthy, yeah, no doubt about that. That's a given.
Okay. How about you, Shaun? Would you agree with this?
You know, I think it's a really strategic contingency on Edmonton's part because I'm split down the middle. You know, I don't want this to sound like a repeat of what Greg said, so I'll kind of mix it up a little bit as far as my reasoning goes. But, you know, Edmonton making 3 rounds, not going to happen. Couldn't, you know, I don't know how much more simply you can state it, but they're just not there yet. They're not ready. They're not going to do it. That would be a massive surprise beyond anything we've seen in recent years if this current Edmonton Oilers roster has any sort of a deep run anytime soon. And again, you know, like Greg said, that's not a knock on Keith. That's a knock on the rest of their lineup. Keith is coming in to help lead this team and get them to that next stage, but it's not going to happen next year. Where strategic is, you know, obviously Keith is known to be a minute muncher, and I don't suspect that that's going to go away anywhere anytime soon. And when you look at Edmonton's roster, Nurse led the team last year as far as skaters go with just over 25 minutes, but then there's a pretty hefty drop off and it goes, you know, forward, defense, forward, etc. So Keith can absolutely be up in that top 4 for ice time. So that's an easy one to attain. So that might have been a little bit of a carrot dangling that Edmonton was able to say, hey, he'll probably do that. So, you know, this might work to your advantage. But the reality is I also think there's something sneaky at play here because with Edmonton's outlook, they can also just kind of hone in on what Keith's doing near the end of the year and just hold him off if they want. They don't have to let him end up in the top 4 minutes if they choose to not make that the reality. So they have a lot more control in that respect. And I think that they can be strategic if they need to be as far as that goes for minutes. So can he end up in the top 4 for sure? Will he? Probably, but Edmonton's not going 3 rounds in these playoffs.
All right. Okay. I'm basically going to agree with you guys in that I don't think the Oilers are going to go 3 rounds. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, they're going to have their due at some point, but I don't think it's yet. They are building and getting better, and I think that Duncan Keith will definitely help them. I think 1 round, 2 rounds, I'm all for it. They could probably do that, and Keith will be integral in those playoffs. Which is why you talk about dangling the carrot, and that they could just kind of drop his time. If they're really competing and if he's really doing well, then they're going to let him play. And I think that you can pretty much count on it, quite frankly, that he'll be in the top 4. He's not going to be in the top 1 or the top 2, but he's still the guy that plays the minutes, and especially in the playoffs, I think he's going to be integral to their success. Not success of 3 rounds. Okay, so you're right. It probably is going to end up being a 3rd round pick. But I guess my point there was that I think that Keith is going to be an important part of their any playoff run that they do. So let's get on to this next, moving on to a juicy rumor regarding the Blackhawks here. According to Scott Powers of The Athletic, a source has told him that the Blackhawks might be interested in trading for goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury from the Vegas Golden Knights. So Fleury only has 1 year left on his contract, but it's for a hefty $7 million cap hit. And we did discuss earlier, in past shows, that adding a veteran goaltender to the Blackhawks would be a good idea for this rebuilding team. But the important word is a cheap veteran goalie, which $7 million, Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't exactly fit that bill of a cheap veteran goalie. So what kind of package or situation, if any, would you feel would make it worth it to acquire the star Vegas netminder Fleury? Sean, what do you think?
Well, first of all, anyone who follows me on Twitter or engages with us or watches this show knows that I'm a big Fleury fan, no matter where he's played. It's only been a couple of teams, but the reality is I'm not a fan of the team so much he's played on, but I'm a big fan and supporter of Fleury. I think he's one of the most underrated goalies in this era of the game, and I will hold to that. However, keeping consistent with my stance on bringing in any big name, and goalies included, it's just not the time, and it makes no sense to make this kind of a spend for this kind of a goalie at this time in their rebuild. Would I love to have a Fleury Blackhawks jersey? Absolutely. But is it good for this team? No. He needs to go somewhere, if he's going to go anywhere, that is a contender and needs to win and ready to win now. He's aging, which is obvious, but he's obviously playing great hockey, so he can help a contender. He's not going to come in and help the Hawks to the degree that they would need him to for it to be worth the spend. Just doesn't make sense. They, like you said, they need to be picking up a veteran goalie. There's no doubt. And I think that they should, but needs to come on the cheap, needs to come from someone who's maybe looking for that victory lap, wants to still be part of the game. Maybe someone who the Hawks are familiar with, who can come in and be a good voice for the kids there, for the Lankinens and the Delias and the Subbans if he's still around, but not a Fleury. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Would you agree with that, Greg? Do you think that the Blackhawks should make a play for Fleury?
Well, when this rumor first came out, I immediately was just like, this is stupid. But the more I thought about it, there's a scenario that it would make sense if done correctly. If you're going to bring him in to just be the guy because you think he's going to help you win, that's dumb. Just because you have salary cap space to spend doesn't mean you should always maybe say, doesn't make sense there. Plus, it would stunt the growth and development of Kevin Lankinen, who showed so much promise last year. And if you're going to essentially make him a backup next year, again, counterproductive. But if you do when you're a rebuilding team like the Blackhawks supposedly are, even though they're kind of stuck in the middle, you got to get creative to get assets. Assets is what makes a rebuild work. You need as many draft picks, as many young players as possible. Now, there's a way you can get a lot out of this. Blackhawks are one of the few teams that can afford all of Fleury's $7 million cap hit next season. So maybe squeeze the Knights for a top prospect or a high pick or two, much like the Blackhawks had to give up Teuvo Teravainen to get rid of Brian Bickle's contract, much like they had to give up Stephen Johns to get rid of Patrick Sharp's contract. So if you can do that, then that you add an asset, at least one asset. And I mentioned on Twitter, hey, what if we ask him for Cody Glass? And I got lambasted by Vegas fans. They're never going to trade Cody Glass. Oh, really? Huh? 2 hours later, he was traded for pennies on the dollar, but that's another topic. But then you get the assets from Vegas for taking on his full salary, and then you flip him at the deadline to a contender like a Toronto Maple Leafs or Carolina Hurricanes that could really use a guy like that for the playoffs. And then you say, hey, we can retain almost maybe all of his salary here, give us more, and then you get even more assets for half a season of basically just paying his salary, which the Blackhawks are in a position to do. So if they did something like that, I'd be on board for that. I don't think they're going to, because it just makes too much sense for it to actually play out in real life. But if you did it to gain assets and speed up your rebuild by adding more picks and prospects, then I'm all for it. If you're doing it just to bring him in here because you think you got some ghost of a chance to get the AC to the playoffs, would get you nowhere, then no, skip it.
Okay, I like where you're going there, getting a little bit creative with it all. So I guess I would add to this that I would absolutely love to see Fleury as a member of the Blackhawks. Again, like Shaun, he's one of my favorite goaltenders. Ripe old age of 36, but he's still putting up those elite numbers. Then as a trophy winner this past season, well deserved. And then all the kind of adversary that he's been through. The Pittsburgh Penguins cast him off, and then he went on to really be a great role leader for the Vegas Golden Knights. And then he gets threatened with that by, Robin Leonard's coming in and, you're back up again, although it didn't really work out that way. But I think that, if they could get Fleury, it would light a fire under Lankinen. He could mentor him. It might actually help his development. Maybe it could hurt it too. But I'm looking at that $7 million, and I know that they have some extra money, but I also know that they really need to spend money on defense. I'd love to see them get one or two defensemen. I just don't know if it's going to fit. And so I guess in my head, I was thinking if the only way that it would work is if they were going to retain some of his salary to make it work. So we'll see. A couple creative ideas here. Do we really think Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be part of the Blackhawks? Probably not, but it sure is a fun rumor to talk about. So, all right. Well, I'm going to, we're about to head into the expansion draft topics of our show. But before we do, I'd like to remind you, you can follow the Hockey Writers across social media on your preferred platform of choice. We have lots of shows and great content. And besides three of us, and of course, Brooke as well, we have 100 other writers who share their thoughts and expertise on all the teams in the league, soon to be 32 teams in the league. So you can also visit our website, hockeywriters.com as well. And of course, follow us individually too. We're lots of fun. We've got our Twitter handles here on the screens, on the bottom of our screens. So moving on, let's talk about the Seattle Kraken Expansion Draft. It's coming up on this Wednesday, which is tomorrow when our show hits, after our show hits. And the Kraken, of course, as we know, will select one player from every team with the exception of the Vegas Golden Knights, who joined the league, via their own expansion draft in 2017. So they're exempt. Objective list released Sunday. And there was speculation there was lots of speculation with Blackhawks on who they would protect on defense. So in my preview post before this show, I asked us all to predict which three defensemen the Blackhawks would protect out of Calvin DeHaan, Caleb Jones, Connor Murphy, Riley Stillman, and Nikita Zadorov. And Brooke actually chose Zadorov, whereas the three of us we went with the correct people that were protected. So Murphy was protected, Stillman was protected, and the newly acquired Caleb Jones. It's a bit of a surprise with Nikita Zadorov. Lots of people on Twitter, lots of people all over the place were saying, "Oh my gosh, I actually can't believe that they're not protecting him." So I guess I'd like to go around the table and kind of get our thoughts as to whether you thought that was a surprise or what you think about the other three picks here. And let's go ahead and start with Greg.
Well, we can be honest with our listeners. The reason that Brooke isn't here is because she was the only one that wanted to protect Zadorov. So we left her unprotected this week. So that's what's going on there. But seriously, I'm not surprised, but I'm relieved more because that's the move to make. And I'm wasn't 100% sure they'd actually do it. But as we got closer to the that roster freeze on Saturday, there were multiple reports that they were trying to trade Zadorov before the deadline, so they didn't have to protect him or unprotect him. There was also reports at the in-season trade deadline the Hawks were trying to move him. I think when they acquired Riley Stillman, and Stan Bowman basically fell all over himself to talk about how physical Stillman is, I think that he had found his Zadorov replacement right there and then, and his days were numbered. Ideally, I think they want to trade him, but they're going to unprotect him, and maybe he'll be Seattle's problem. Scott Powers, I believe it was a few weeks ago, reported that his agent wants 5 years at like $5.8 million per year. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I understand you're his agent. You're doing your job. You start high, but not that high. So let those negotiations be somebody else's problem at this point. So surprised, no, maybe pleasantly surprised is the way to do it. It's the right move. I was just unsure if they were going to make that correct move.
Okay. What do you think, Sean? What do you make of them choosing Murphy, Stillman, and Jones over Zadorov and
Yeah, not surprised at all, to be honest. Not that any of us know what was going through the Blackhawks management heads, but I had a pretty good feeling for whatever reason that they weren't going to protect Zadorov, and perhaps that's just bias because I really didn't want them to, and they didn't. So I'm quite happy about that, and I'm obviously glad he wasn't protected because I don't want him in Chicago. I never wanted him in Chicago. So with him being left exposed, it's one foot out the door, and I hope that the other foot can follow. It sounds like harsh criticism, but again, I just never saw him being a good fit here. And then I think now's the time to really make the case for the fact that he shouldn't be part of this build any longer. With that said, and not to sound overly hypocritical, I understand what he brings to the game. I totally get it. And I know why Chicago brought him in. He just didn't seem natural out there with this team. So his physical presence, the fact that he can put up a couple points here and there, and he can be a sturdy blue liner, can still work for a number of other teams. And perhaps Seattle is that team. If they're looking to build around, that physical presence of the blue line, which is a little more rare these days because a lot of these defensemen, these elite defensemen, are offensively minded, so much more so than what we're used to, back in the traditional days of the game. So perhaps Zadorov is exactly going to end up where he needs to be, which is Seattle, and maybe that's the kind of place where he can have a fresh start, an actual, real fresh start to prove what he is capable of and why he's on an NHL caliber team, and maybe make a better name for himself than he was able to in Chicago. So not surprised at all. Happy he's unprotected, and frankly, I hope Seattle picks him.
Yeah, I was happy. I was definitely happy with the 3 picks, and I thought that they made sense. Obviously, Connor Murphy, best all-around defenseman last year, good solid asset to the team. I had a no-brainer that they were going to keep him. You guys both already touched on it. Stillman is a very similar player to Zadorov. He's younger, he's cheaper, he's 23 years old. 3-year contract for $1.35 million annual cap hit that he just signed the extension right after he came to the Blackhawks. So Zadorov is 26. You had mentioned, Greg, that 5-point-something million. It's probably going to be more around 3 or 4 million. Okay, 4 million, and maybe not as long as 5-year term, depending on where he goes and what happens. But to me, and then when Jones came, when we didn't have to protect Keith, and then Jones came, that's where I at first I thought that they would protect Zadorov. But then when Jones came, it just made sense for them to keep Jones. If they really are going to make a play for Seth Jones, the brother of Caleb Jones, then obviously they have to protect Caleb. We'll argue, and we'll talk a little bit more about this too. Whether it's worth it and what the price is gonna be to acquire Seth Jones. But this move kind of makes me feel like they really are serious about this. And Bowman made a pretty good deal getting Keith and trading him and not having to retain any of his cap hits. So let's hope that he has something up his sleeve here, and we'll kind of see how that all plays out. So we're obviously here we've talked at length about these 3 defensemen that were protected, and the defensemen that were left unprotected. But let's talk about everyone that was left exposed and who we think will actually be chosen by the Kraken from the Blackhawks. I know that we've made these projections before, but now we have a little bit more information. So I guess I'd like to kind of revisit this and tell me if you hold to your original pick or not. So let's just go over who's available, who could be chosen. Leaving off some of the lesser AHL names just for simplicity's sake. The big names from the Blackhawks that Seattle could take: Ryan Carpenter, forwards Ryan Carpenter, Brett Connolly, Adam Gaudette, and Vinny Hinostroza. On defense, we just talked about, there's Calvin DeHaan and Nikita Zadorov. And goaltenders, Alan Delia and Malcolm Subban. So who is your pick to go to the Seattle Kraken? And, obviously tell me a little bit why. Greg, go ahead.
First off, I want to congratulate the Blackhawks on putting together the absolute worst group of unprotected players in this league. I mean, I'm being like, that's a good thing, like for us at least. Like,
oh, I see.
You're looking at everybody else who's got players exposed, and then you look at the Blackhawks, and Seattle's going, do we have to take one of these guys? Yeah. So I had originally been saying Calvin DeHaan all along. Might still be there. My head says, they're going to go with one of the defensemen, DeHaan or Zadorov. They may pick up Zadorov in the with the thinking that they would then try and flip him. The Blackhawks have been trying to trade him. Andy Strickland, who covers the Blues for a bunch of different media outlets, reported yesterday that this Kraken were thinking about Zadorov. So they may look, if they're hearing what the market is bearing, is what the Blackhawks are trying to trade, maybe it's something they want to try and get, and they bring him in to flip him for picks and prospects. So I'm going to lean towards Zadorov. I don't know if that's wishful thinking or not, but a sneaky good pick though might be taking Adam Gaudette, because they do need players to play on their AHL team as well. So, but
Wait,
foot to the foot.
Take the two?
Is Gaudette. They may sneak, and then they may go completely opposite direction, take Adam Gaudette, because you can't dress 30 NHL players right off the gate. So foot to the fire. I had to pick one. I will say they're going to take Zadorov. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so your original pick was DeHaan. Now you're going with Zadorov, so you're sticking with defensemen, but based upon kind of some of these changes here.
Yeah, based on looking around and what the other defensemen are left and kind of the salary cap, I think they still go with one of those two guys, but I'm going to go Zadorov.
Do you think they'll re-sign him and he'll get that $4 million?
Not my problem anymore.
Okay.
I hope they give him $7 million 7 years. At that point, I could care less. As long as it's not the Blackhawks, I don't care what he gets.
That's true. It's off the books, right? Yep. Okay, Sean, who is your pick? Who's your pick to go to Seattle?
Yeah, so similarly, I had DeHaan right off the bat, and then all this talk about Zadorov made me think that maybe he would be a good fit. I sort of started to convince myself that he might be a good fit in Seattle to have that start, like I just spoke about. But this question made me think back to our the Hockey Writers mock expansion draft that we just completed last week, and to be honest with you, it sort of touched on Greg's rationale, because Tony Wallach of the Red Wings team, who spearheaded the project, ended up picking Malcolm Subban, and his justification was simply that the Hawks really had no one else of interest, so might as well take a goalie that they can help fill out their roster even on an AHL level who comes on the cheap, because nobody else had anything to bring to the squad. So frankly, with that in mind, it kind of does make sense. You might as well bring Subban in, who not only will come on the cheap, and you can throw him in the net, obviously, in a backup position if you need to. But, I mean, he has expansion experience. He played with Vegas, and he played quite well. So maybe that is someone they want to look at from that perspective, to not bring in to take the load of work by any stretch, clearly, because he hasn't proven that he can do that. But might not be a bad idea to get someone like that in on the cheap and help fill out the roster with someone who has familiarity with the process.
Okay, so you're thinking Subban, huh?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, my pick, I'm actually gonna stick with my original pick, and that was forward Adam Gaudette. I think that he is a sneaky good pick, and I'm going with my theory that I think that the Kraken have better defensive options elsewhere. which is why I don't even think it really matters that the Blackhawks protected. And I think that they might have even known that based upon talks that might already be in the works. So I just that my hunch is that they're not going to go with the defenseman. I think that they're going to go with Gaudette. He of the remaining forwards, he would be difficult for them to pass up. Solid depth forward, tons of potential to be, a top 6 player or just a depth player. Let's see, he had 1 goal and 3 assists in 7 games with the Blackhawks. He put together a pretty nice showing there at the end after they acquired him. Anywhere he was placed in the lineup, he seemed to create, he seemed to complement. And so I just think that he has a lot of potential. And plus, his last contract, he's going to be a restricted free agent, but his last contract was only $950,000. He would come cheap. So I think that could be a pick that might be kind of a smart move for the Kraken. So it'll definitely be interesting to see who they do go with.
One thing that could make Gaudette attractive to Seattle, and it worked for Vegas, that they got a bunch of guys that had chips on their shoulder. And Gaudette, when he came here to Chicago, did not mince words when it came to his feelings about how his time with the Vancouver Canucks ended. Who's going to be Seattle's most natural rivalry based on geographic location? It's going to be those Vancouver Canucks. So maybe getting a guy that wants to prove a team you're going to play 6 or 7 times a year wrong, that might not be a bad idea either, especially a cheap one.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. We should play some bets or something, huh? Whoever wins out.
I don't think we have a gambling show yet on the Hockey Writers.
And we really should check with Brooke too via Twitter or something and see her final pick is as well before Wednesday, before we know for sure. All right. I'm going to get to the kind of the final topic that really does have to do with the expansion draft as well, but it's kind of after the expansion draft. One thing that stood out to me when I perused Twitter the last few days with all this expansion draft buzz was a tweet from the Athletics' Jesse Granger, and he covers the Vegas Golden Knights. We know that the Knights, didn't have to expose anybody, but that doesn't mean that that there aren't implications for them. The Golden Knights GM Kelly McCrimmon put it pretty well in that he said that he believes the period directly following the expansion draft will be filled with moves, signings, trades, because teams have been holding off and they don't really want to change their expansion production situation. So it probably is true that there's going to be a lot of moves and signings, and as soon as that trade freeze is lifted on Thursday. So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about what player or players that you foresee the Blackhawks from the Blackhawks being involved in some of this trading that might be going on. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, so speaking back again to that mock expansion draft that we did with the Hockey Writers, I don't know if I've just convinced myself or if it really is just the rumblings that we get the feeling that Dylan Strome has just worked his way out of this roster. It just feels like he no longer has a fit, and that's kind of weird to say because he's still on the young side. He still has a lot to prove, and he's shown glimpses of what he can do, which has been exciting, and that's made us want him to stick around and want to see more of him. But at the same time, with all those healthy scratches near the end of the year, the fact that he couldn't really find a good fit, wasn't really winning many faceoffs near the latter part of the year, I just don't know that they want to keep that kind of player around when they have other players who are trying to make their way up and prove their worth versus a player who's kind of been regressing ever since he got here. So I think it might be time that they move on from Strome. And, I don't suspect the Hawks are going to do as well as I did to give myself a pat on the back here, but I was able to secure a first-round pick from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Dylan Strome in that mock draft. I don't suspect the Hawks are going to do that well, but if they can get rid of him and see his salary go along with him and get something, whether that's a pick or a prospect, I'd be happy with that.
Okay, so you think Dylan Strome is on the move. Would you agree with that, Greg? And who else you might have in mind?
I'd be surprised if Dylan Strome is back. I've been saying since the end of the last season that I think he's played his last game here, and I think they protected him because they think there is some trade value for him on the market, and they just didn't want to lose him for nothing. So I wouldn't be surprised if Strome is on another team. I'd be more surprised if he was here with the Blackhawks when training camp started than elsewhere. And if I'm Stan Bowman and somebody calls and offers me a first-round pick, I am taking that in a heartbeat before he can hang up the phone and change his mind. tough. There's so many moving pieces to this summer. There could be. I wouldn't rule out anybody getting moved at this point. There's so many different scenarios. If they can come to an agreement for Seth Jones, who gets traded in that, you've heard every name out there. And just to warn people, to remind people, just because somebody is speculating that this is a player that Columbus wants, they rarely get those players. So that, everybody needs to calm down on the Kirby Doc or Alex DeBrincat talk. For one of those two guys to get moved, you better be getting something very special. And I don't think Seth Jones fits that bill per se. So it could be a lot of people. We could see some of those younger guys get moved. Maybe a Philip Kurashev, his name's come up. Maybe in Morgan Entwistle if they're trying to get some defensive help. They've got a lot of forwards under contract right now, so they're probably going to have to move at least one or two. I think it also depends on who gets picked by Seattle. If they don't pick Zadorov, then do they keep trying to trade his rights away? I think they do. One way or the other, I don't think it certainly doesn't look like they want him back next year. And, how do you sit down and negotiate in good faith with an agent after you've unsuccessfully tried to trade him at least twice already this season? So that's definitely a prime candidate. And, it's going to be tough. And, if Subban or Delia doesn't get traded, do you trade one of those guys? If they don't get picked up by Seattle, does one of those guys get traded, or do you, put one of those guys in the AHL next? There's a lot of moving pieces here, and we'll get a first idea of how this offseason is going to go Wednesday night. And I think McCrimmon is right. Once that happens, it's going to get crazy. I want to post that Samuel L. Jackson meme from Jurassic Park. Hold on to your butts. That's what we're going to be in for the next few days.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely agree that if Zadorov doesn't get picked, he would be part of trade talks. See what value they can get for him. I would definitely think that Strome could be involved. They're saying with Seth Jones, Columbus Blue Jackets, they're definitely looking for young centers. Strome fits that bill. Obviously, he would just be one part of the package. So I'm going to just throw out some other names that you guys haven't mentioned. I don't think anybody has said Lucas Reichel or Henrik Borgstrom yet. One of them, valuable pieces, but they're young and unproven. So you might have to give up one of them to add to something else, kind of thing. Again, what about these youngsters on defense? An Ian Mitchell or Nicholas Bonine might be thrown into a trade package as well. So yeah, there's definitely, you put it really well, Greg, when you say just lots of moving pieces and lots of stuff to keep our eyes on. But I do definitely believe that there's going to be lots of action and lots of movement. So all stuff for us to keep an eye on. All exciting things.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot to talk about in the next couple of weeks, that's for sure, which is good because after that, it's going to get very slow.
Yeah, we'll be doing all those hypotheticals and making hypothetical lines and all that for a while, or maybe take a week off here. But anyway, all right, that's all the topics that we have for tonight. But before we go, I would definitely like to remind you to tune in on Wednesday night. I believe it's ESPN2, 7 p.m. Central Time. They're going to have the expansion draft. So I'm looking forward to seeing who it gets picked from every team, along with the Blackhawks. Who is the Seattle Kraken team going to be? This isn't the kind of thing that happens every year. So, but speaking of which, every year it does happen is the annual entry draft, which, believe it or not, is the next 2 days after that, this Friday and Saturday. We didn't really talk about that at all on this show, but there's definitely going to be a lot to discuss about that next week. And Greg is slated to host for us next week. So you better believe that Mr. Prospect Man over here is going to want to discuss some entry-level draft stuff.
Yes, for sure. And if you're time for a cheap shameless plug, head over to thehockeywriters.com. I previewed all three positions for possible first-round picks. So if you want a forward, a defenseman, or a goaltender in the first round, I got you covered with who those guys might be. So head over to the site and check that out.
Yeah, and didn't you guys also do some kind of special draft podcast where you kind of had a mock pick? That was I caught a little bit of that. So.
Yeah, we did that yesterday. our draft experts, Peter Berardini, Matthew Zader, and Andrew Forbes and myself sat down. We've had a few podcasts with their rankings, and yesterday we did a first round mock draft, and I put them all on the spot with how they think the first 5 picks are going to go. So fun little show. Doesn't take up a lot of your time. That's a good one to check out too, just to kind of get a feel for where that first round may shake out come Friday night.
Awesome. As usual, we have a lot going on here at the Hockey Writers. One more thing, just to add. Next Wednesday, the 28th, free agency opens up, so there'll be even more going on with trades and with signings and that kind of thing. So definitely be sure to tune in and join us. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, listen. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us again next week. So long, everybody.